because she didn't know whether to believe the child or not, because she told stories, she told lies, so the story changed all the time, so she did not feel like she could tell it. So I just want to put that to the court and make sure that the court has no problem with me going into that.
First, Judge, we would object to that because she had Tessa Daniel, who is the biological mother, on the stand on the cross. If she believed that that was something that she had said, she had an opportunity to ask her about that at that time. Now to ask Samantha White about something that Tessa Daniel said would be hearsay. And furthermore, I would like to know what the defense is referring to, that they saw this information, because the state has not, I don't have anything that's dead on to what the defense is indicating the statement was made. So if we could at least be directed at what exactly she's talking about.
Okay, yeah, what I'm hearing, and just correct me if I'm wrong, is that first of all, we're going to have Samantha White testify. Second, that as we discussed, there were a few forensic interviews. One of them we had agreed not to go into the substance of because it was unrelated to this case, except for the fact that there was a forensic interview. And it was a forensic interview of whom?
It was a forensic interview of Miller.
Of Miller. Okay.
Whose credibility is.
Well, that I understand. That's what I thought you might be saying. That you wanted to extract from this, beyond what we discussed, something that Tessa said?
Yes, I got Tessa I got the ability to recall her. So if the state's only objection is that I'm not asking it of Tessa, I can do so. I've noticed this in Ms. White's testimony and Ms. White's going to come out, and I would refer the court and the state to page 105 of 172 of defects records. And on there it said, caseworker informed the biological mother that the girls are in therapy due to the allegations made by Millie. Caseworker stated that there was a forensic completed and that nothing was stated in the interview. She's aware of the, and then she said, she, talking about Tessa, is aware of the incident and says that it was a guy named Marcus who was the boyfriend of Cynthia Tate. She did not do anything about it because Millie's story would change, so she thought she was making it up, unquote.
And Judge, I just want to be really quick because I think we're mixing things up. There are several different incidents. This was a statement that was made in July 7th of 2015. A time before the children, that particular incident was a time before the children even went into care and was not the subject of that particular forensic interview. If I could just lay a little bit of foundation, when the children were placed with Ms. Brown made a statement to the case manager that she had observed the girls touching themselves and was concerned. And at that time, that's when these allegations, possibly someone by the name of Marcus may have touched the girls at some previous time. And then that was the reason why they went forward with a forensic interview. I think to get into all that, it would be confusing to the juror because it has really nothing to do with this particular case.
That's true.
But it goes to credibility of Millie, and the fact that her mother says on the stand, she said she doesn't lie. And here we have a statement from her saying that in fact she did not report her own child's child molestation because she couldn't count on the story being accurate.
And Judge, I would further say there are no sexual assault charges.
Stop for a second. I have to take this in and think about it. It seems to me the first thing is that it's not so much the forensic interview that's the issue. It's that the issue is whether or not Millie is always making consistent statements, and And that's something that we've heard a lot already. I think that you would both agree. True.
Yes, sir.
So it's not as though this is the only place from which to extract such information, number one. And so when you're balancing the risk of confusing the jury with the set of unrelated and allegations against the benefit to the defense in extracting this additional piece of information without context. I think that the balance weighs heavily in favor of exclusion of that particular bit of information. But I'm not so sure that that is the right lens through which to look at it, but certainly a piece of this analysis. Is there, and I'm sorry I stopped you, Ms. Young, is there anything else you want to add there?
I'll stop there, Judge.
Nothing else?
Nothing else at this point.
All right, Ms. Long.
Your Honor, I can ask it when I call the court's commissioning force. I can ask it of Tessa. Tessa was asked, does she tell lies? Oh, she only tells little lies. She doesn't tell big lies. Well, this is a fairly enormous lie that what the state is wanting is to hide that fact that her own mother does not report child molestation because she can't be sure that her daughter's not making it up.
I think that can be separated from the forensic interview. In other words, you don't have to ask it through this witness, but instead you would recall Tessa for that purpose, and that would be, I suppose, arguably you had a chance to fully and do a thorough and sifting cross-examination of Tessa already. But that would be the way I think that we navigate this issue without complicating things too much. Does the state disagree?
No, Your Honor, and we'll cross that bridge. I think the state would have other issues if we came to that point, but I agree that this is the best way to move forward at this point.
At this point. All right. Is that acceptable?
That's acceptable.
Okay, let's do that. And if we could please call our next witness.
Samantha White.
I guess we would come. I apologize for the delay, but I can assure you we've been working. Let's go ahead and have Ms. White approach the witness stand.
Can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give should be the truth and the whole truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Please lower your hand and state and spell your first and last name.
Samantha White, and it's spelled Samantha, and last name White, White.
And Ms. White, how are you employed currently?
Currently, I work at a group home.
Okay. And how long have you been employed with that group home?
Since November.
And you have a really soft voice.
I'm sorry.
I ask you to speak up, pull the mic up, and keep your voice up, please.
Okay.
That's much better, yes.
Sorry about that.
And prior to working at this group home, where were you employed?
I was working at Mary Mac's Tea Room.
Okay, and prior to that?
Prior to that, Starbucks.
Let me go, 2015, where were you employed?
Henry County DFACS.
Okay. And how long had you been employed with Henry County DFACS in 2015?
For about 3 years. It would have been 3 years.
And what position did you hold while you were employed at DFACS?
Foster care case manager.
And tell me about your background that led you to DFACS. Your educational training and experience.
Okay, well, I graduated with my bachelor's in criminal justice. After that, it was really just college experience.
And prior to working for DFACS, what did you do?
I was still working with Starbucks.
Okay. And when you started working for DFACS, did you have any type of training?
Yes, I was sent to training.
And what type of training did you have?
Just foster care training, just going over rules and procedures, how to talk with children.
And how long was that training that you received from DFACS?
I'm not sure exactly how long it lasted, but it was different trainings that would usually last about a week long, each training.
And would you go through those week-long trainings over the course of your 3 years with DFACS?
Yes, it was done in the beginning.
And after you were complete your training, did you handle a caseload?
Yes, ma'am.
How many cases did you have on your caseload?
I'm not sure the exact number.
An average is fine.
Probably about 7 to 10.
And what was your responsibility?
Maybe more.
I'm sorry.
I said maybe more.
What were your responsibilities as to your caseload? What were your duties? What did you have to do?
I have to see the parent and the children and the foster parents once a month. If they were in school, check on them in school, see how they were doing with their grades. If they were in therapy, check in with their therapist to see how they were doing. Make sure they were going to their appointments.
Okay. And we've heard about various different units in DFACS. What unit were you considered to work in?
Foster care.
Okay. And was your caseload involving the children or the foster parent?
Both.
Both. And was part of your job to provide resources to the foster parents?
No, it would be for the children.
If the foster parent needed resources, who would provide those?
I'm not sure who would provide them, but I could put them on the right path.
Who would you send them to?
They could go to OFI, how the regular parents do. They had to fill out the same applications if assistance was needed.
Okay. And you talked about going over, I guess, rules and procedures with DFACS.
Yes, ma'am.
What rules and procedures in regards to corporal punishment did DFACS have?
We don't allow corporal punishment.
And what is the definition of corporal punishment by DFACS?
Physical force to discipline a child.
And was this information given to all foster parents?
Yes, ma'am.
And in regards to doctor's visits and hospital visits, who handled those?
It could be either the foster parent or the case manager.
And you mentioned school. Who handled, if the child was school age, who handled those responsibilities as far as the child going to school? Registration and all.
It would be shared. The foster parent could register. If they were unable to, the case manager would.
And then I think you said therapy or counseling. Who would handle that?
The case manager.
And what all did that involve in handling counseling or therapy as a case manager?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that for me?
What all were your duties if you had someone that was involved in counseling or therapy? As a case manager, what would be your duties?
To send out the referral for therapy, a service authorization if it was needed, and to check in with the therapist, see how the child is doing, to see if they need something more intense or if therapy was needed.
So if a child on your caseload was involved in therapy, would you have knowledge of that?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you have direct contact with that therapist or counselor?
Yes, ma'am.
And those therapy and counseling, where would those, if a child was in therapy or counseling, where would that occur?
What do you mean?
Would it be in an office? Would it be in home? Or would it be in a facility? Where would those therapy sessions or counseling sessions occur?
It depends on the therapist, but they're usually done in the home.
And I want to move you forward to when dealing with, as a case manager, you dealt with the children, the foster parents. Who handled or worked with the biological parents if they were present?
That would be the case manager as well.
Okay. And what would be your duties as far as the biological parents or caregivers?
Well, for them, I would check in with them at least once a month as well to make sure that they are completing their case plan.
Did your responsibilities in regards to the biological parents involve visitations?
Yes, ma'am.
And how were those handled? As a case manager, how would you handle those? As far as scheduling, who would that go through?
That would go through the case manager, and sometimes it's contracted out if it has to be supervised. And then with that, we have to work with the person who will be supervising the visitation.
Let's talk about unsupervised visitations. If they're unsupervised visitations with the biological parent, how was scheduling of those handled?
Still, we just meet with the parent to come up with a good schedule, because sometimes you have to work around their work schedule.
And how would the foster parent, what part did the foster parent play in those schedulings?
If they're unsupervised, sometimes we can let the foster parent and the biological parent, depending on their relationship with each other, we can let them work together in coming up with a schedule that works for both of them.
And if they're supervised?
If they're supervised, it still would be the same. We can let them set up a schedule that works for them, but it also has to be, you have to have someone available to supervise the visit.
And would the foster parent ever be the person that, I guess, did the supervised visitations?
If they felt comfortable enough, they would be allowed to supervise the visit.
And if they did not, how would that be handled?
Then we would have someone supervise the visit for them, well, in place of them.
And who would DFACS normally use for those supervised visits?
We had people who we were contracted with who could come in and supervise visits.
And if you had supervised visits, where would those visits occur?
They could occur out in the community or at the DFACS office.
And then in regards to, I guess, doctor visits and hospital visits or dental visits, what part did the case manager, as yourself as a case manager, play in assuring that the children, I guess, attended those different appointments?
Sometimes we would make the appointments, we could arrange the appointments, or the foster parent can make the appointments because it's also based on their schedule as well. If a foster parent is unable to take the child to the appointment, then the case manager will take them.
At some point in 2015, did your caseload include Millie Place and Layla Daniel?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you become the case manager for Millie Place and Layla Daniel?
They were assigned to me.
And do you recall when you were assigned their case?
It was sometime in April.
April of what year?
April of 2014, or 14 or 15.
Would looking at
Not
something
sure.
help to refresh your recollection?
Yes, ma'am. April 2015.
And make sure you keep your voice up for me. What
Yes,
year was
ma'am.
that?
2015.
And at the time that Millie and Layla came into care, were they in placement?
Yes, ma'am.
Were they already in placement when you were assigned as their case manager?
Yes, ma'am.
And where were they in placement at?
They were placed with Miss Brown.
And as their case manager, were you aware of why they were in placement, why they were in DFACS custody?
Due to neglect and drug use.
Did any of their history indicate that there had been any history of physical abuse?
Not to my knowledge.
At the time that Millie and Layla were on your case plan, on your caseload, did you have contact with the biological parents?
Yes, ma'am.
Which parents did you have contact with?
Both biological fathers and the biological mother.
Let's talk about the biological fathers.
Okay.
As to Millie, who was her biological father?
If
Would it help you to look at something?
yes, but I honestly don't remember whose father was who. Yes, Jacob Place.
And what about Layla?
And Mr. Anthony Daniels.
What contact, if any, did you have with Jacob Place?
I did have contact with Jacob Place. Once he was out, he would come in and he would meet with me at the DFACS office.
And you said once he was out, what do you mean?
Out of jail,
Okay. And he met with you where?
the DFACS office.
During the time that you were the caseworker for Millie Place, did Mr. Jacob Place have any visitations with Millie or Layla?
Visitations were arranged. There were supervised visits.
I'm sorry?
Yes, he had supervised visits.
Okay. And do you know how many times those visits occurred?
I do not remember how many.
Were those visits always supervised?
Yes.
Were you involved in supervising those visits?
No, we had someone sit in and supervise the visits.
Was it the foster parents that were supervising those visits?
They were allowed to supervise some of them, but in the beginning, they started out at the DFACS office.
And what about Anthony Daniel? What contact did you have with him, if any?
Yes, I met with him as well. We would meet at the DFACS office, and he was given visitation as well, but supervised.
And Tessa Daniel, did you have contact with her?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did she have visitations?
Yes, ma'am.
And were those visitations supervised or unsupervised?
Those were supervised as well.
And do you recall how many visitations she had?
I don't remember exactly how many.
At any point during the time that you were the caseworkers, was Tessa Daniels' visitations canceled by DFACS?
Well, yes.
Who canceled those visitations?
That would be through DFACS,
Okay. And what was the reason that DFACS canceled the visitations?
because we were unable to contact her.
Okay. And I want to make sure that I understand the difference. Was it because were you stopping visitations where she could no longer have visitations, or unable to have visitations because she was not located?
It was because we were unable to locate her.
Was she ever located during the process in which you were the case manager in 2015?
Could you repeat that for me?
Had she ever been located during the time that you were their case manager in 2015?
Yes.
To your knowledge, did she ever go to any of the supervised visitations?
Yes.
How many times did she go to those supervised visitations?
I'm not sure how many, but she made at least a couple of them. Not sure exactly how many.
Did DFACS at any point ever stop or would not allow Tessa Daniel to have visitation with Millie Place or Layla Daniel?
No, ma'am.
Now, you said when the girls first came into care, they were with Ms. Brown.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you familiar with Ms. Brown at all?
Like, did I know her personally?
Did you know her? Had you ever placed any of your other children with her? Did you know anything about Ms. Brown prior to, I guess, Millie Place and Layla Daniel being placed in her home?
No, ma'am.
And as part of your duties, did you ever visit the girls when they were with Ms. Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times would you say you visited the girls during the time they were placed with Ms. Brown?
I'm not sure exactly how many times, but probably like at least 4 or 5 times. You have to go out there once a month.
And when you would go out for visits once a month, what would you do?
I would go out, I would speak with Millie, sit with the girls, primarily speak with Millie because she was the one who was talking. Then I would also speak with Miss Brown to see how she was doing with the girls and if she needed anything from me and how they had been adjusting to the home.
And how were they adjusting to the home?
They were doing okay. Definitely wanting to be with family members.
And how would you know they wanted to be with family members?
Millie would often speak about wanting to be with her grandmother,
And who was her grandmother?
Miss Banks.
And was Millie having visits with Miss Banks during the time that they were in the home with Miss Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How often would those visits occur?
About every week, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure.
And were those visits supervised visits or unsupervised visits?
They were unsupervised.
And how long would those visits last with Miss Banks?
Sometimes she would do day visits and sometimes she would keep her overnight.
What about Layla? Was she having visits with Miss Peggy Banks?
Not during that time, no, ma'am.
And do you know why she was not having visits?
To my understanding, she didn't really have a connection with Layla. She had primarily been with Millie, and that's who she was doing her visits with.
And you said not at first. At some point during the time when when the girls were with Miss Brown, did Miss Banks start to have visitation with Millie and Layla?
Not while they were with Miss Brown.
During the time they were with Miss Brown, I'm gonna just ask, when Millie would come back from visits with Peggy while she was with Miss Brown, were there ever any concerns about abuse?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever receive any reports from anyone that the girls would return with any types of injuries or bruises when Millie would go visit with Miss Peggy Banks?
No, ma'am. Not that I was-
Take another step back too.
Okay.
When the girls were first placed with Miss Brown, when you went, did you go out to the home to visit?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you examine the girls per DFACS's protocol?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know any bruises or injuries of any nature on the girls when they first went into care into Miss Brown's home?
No, ma'am.
During the course of time while they were living with Miss Brown, did you ever observe any injuries on the children, on Millie Place or on Layla Daniel?
Not that I remember.
And would it help
I'm
to
trying to think, nothing
refresh your
stands out
recollection
to
if
me
you,
right now.
I'm sorry?
I was like, nothing standing out to me right now.
Okay. Nothing that stood out to you at all?
Correct.
Okay. Besides Millie having visitations with Peggy Banks, did they have visitations with Tessa Daniel during that time?
I don't remember if that started while they were still with Miss Brown or not.
What about with Jacob Place or Anthony Daniel?
If I'm not mistaken, their visit started later.
During the time that Millie Place and Layla were with Miss Brown, were they going to doctor's appointments?
Yes, ma'am.
How were you made aware, or how do you know they were going to doctor's appointments?
Miss Brown would inform me, and I think with their first ones, I was actually the person who made their appointments.
And were they ever in school or daycare during the time that they were with Miss Brown?
No, ma'am.
Were they receiving any type of therapy or counseling while they were with Miss Brown?
If I'm not mistaken, they had started with Pathways.
And to your knowledge, how long did the sessions with Pathways last?
It wasn't long. Layla wasn't verbal, so she wasn't able to do therapy. And at the time, it was stated that Millie wouldn't need to continue.
That she what?
She wouldn't need to continue.
She wouldn't need to continue.
Correct.
Okay. So to your knowledge, after I guess, how many sessions did they have?
With Millie, she probably had maybe like 1 or 2 sessions. She didn't have a lot.
And where did those sessions occur?
They were in the home, if I'm not mistaken.
In whose home?
The foster parents' home.
Which
I'm sorry. Would it have been Miss Brown or Miss Lambert?
And after those couple of sessions, did they continue to have any therapy to your knowledge?
No, ma'am.
And if they received therapy after those couple of sessions, would you have been aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
During the time that the girls were with Miss Brown, were there ever any concerns about Millie lying?
I don't remember anything major about her lying. That sounds familiar, but I don't remember anything specific about her lying about something.
So nothing major.
Correct.
During the time that the girls were with Miss Brown, did they have visitations with anyone else? We talked about Miss Banks, Tessa, Jacob Place, Anthony Daniel. Was there anyone else that they were having visitations with?
No, ma'am.
At some point, did that change and they began to have visitations with someone else while they were with Miss Brown?
Oh, no, ma'am.
Do you know the Rosenbaums, Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how do you know them?
They became, caregivers for Millie and Layla.
When do you recall the Rosenbaums becoming involved with Millie Place and Layla Daniel?
I had received their phone number from a coworker.
And do you recall whose home they were living in at that time?
They were with Miss Lambert at that time, I believe.
And you said you received a phone call from a coworker.
Oh, I received her phone number from a coworker. They had, she had saw them while they were at court. Ms. Rosenbaum had saw them while they were at court.
And what did you do, if anything, with the phone number that you received?
I called and spoke with her. I told her that I was informed that she was interested in being a placement for the girls. So I got, her general information, name, address, how she knew the girls.
And what happened after you got all of that information?
I contacted the biological mother, Miss Tessa.
And what happened once you contacted Tessa?
I let her know that Ms. Rosenbaum had interest in being a placement for the girls. I asked her about their history together and if that's something that she would feel comfortable with.
And what happened after you had that conversation with Tessa Daniel?
Well, after speaking with her and she seemed to be okay with it, we started the process of screening.
And what's the process of screening?
We had to do background checks and a home evaluation.
And were those things done?
Yes, ma'am.
How long did that process take?
I'm not sure exactly how long it took. I would say maybe about a month.
During that time where the process was occurring for the Rosenbaums to I guess, be a placement for the girls, were there visits that they would have?
Yes, ma'am.
Would those visits be supervised or unsupervised?
Their visits were unsupervised.
And how long would those visits last?
They started out as just day visits, and then we worked our way up to overnight visits.
And at some point prior to the girls being placed with the Rosenbaums, did their placement move from Ms. Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall how long the girls were in placement with Ms. Brown prior to them being moved?
I think about maybe 2 months.
And were you involved in moving the girls from their placement with Ms. Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did they go after leaving Ms. Brown's home?
I'm with Miss Lambert.
Prior to moving a child from one foster parent's home to another foster parent's home, is there anything that happens with the girls? Do they go anywhere in between?
They're usually at our office.
Okay. Is there any examinations of the girls done prior to them being placed in a new foster parent's home?
No, ma'am.
Did you observe Millie and Layla prior to them going into Ms. Lambert's home?
It would have been during their visit, but not like in between their move.
So was it, when you say their visits while they were with the Browns, or their visits once they got to the Lamberts?
Well, I mean, it would be both. I'll say it would be done during their visit, like it wasn't done during their move.
Okay. So
If
tell
I'm
me about
understanding.
your visits with with Ms. Brown. At this point, are your visits done and complete when they're moving to Ms. Lambert?
Yes, ma'am.
How long after they are placed with Ms. Lambert is it before you go out to visit?
I know I saw them that day because I was one who placed them with Miss Lambert. I'm not sure when my actual visit was.
So when you say you were the ones who placed them with Ms. Lambert, did you take them to Ms. Lambert's home?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you observe the girls on the day that you took them to Ms. Lambert's home?
No, ma'am.
You didn't see them? Did you see the
No, I mean,
girls?
I saw them,
Okay.
yes, because I dropped them off.
When you saw them, did you see any bruises or injuries on them?
Not that I remember.
Did you do a full examination, or was just picking them up and dropping them off?
I was just dropping them off.
And once they got into did you know Miss Lambert prior to the girls being placed in her home?
Yes, ma'am.
How did you know Miss Lambert?
She was one of our foster parents, and I've had children placed with her before.
During the time that you had children placed with Miss Lambert before, did you ever have any issues or concern about a child's safety with Miss Lambert?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever have a child that was injured while in Miss Lambert's care?
No, ma'am.
And do you recall how long Miss Lambert had been a foster parent at that point?
I'm not sure.
Had she been a foster parent for the 3 years that you had been with DFACS?
Yes, ma'am.
Once the children went with Miss Lambert, did they continue to have visitations with any family members?
Yes, ma'am.
Who were those family members?
She continued visitation with Miss Banks, Miss Tessa, Mr. Place, and Mr. Daniel.
And with Miss Banks, were those still unsupervised visitations?
Yes, ma'am.
And with the biological fathers, were they still supervised visitations?
Yes, ma'am.
What about Tessa Daniel? Were they having any visitations with her?
Yes.
Okay. And were those still supervised?
Yes, ma'am.
What about the Rosenbaums, the defendants? Were they still having visitations with them?
Yes, ma'am.
And the visitations that they were having with the Rosenbaums, where would those visitations occur?
I know sometimes they would have them at the McDonald's that was close by to Miss Lambert's home. Different stuff in the community, and sometimes at the home.
And how did those visitations appear to be going?
They seem to be going well.
And how often would they have those day visits?
I don't remember how often they were.
I'm sorry.
I don't remember how often they were.
And what about with Miss Banks? Were they still having visitations with her?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how often they were?
No, ma'am. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was saying I wasn't sure how many she had, because during that point they were visiting with the parents as well.
So I'm going to start with the parents.
Okay.
When they would come back from visits, when I say them, Millie and Layla, did you ever receive any complaints from Miss Lambert about there being any injuries or bruisings on the girls when they would come back from visits with Tessa Daniel, Jacob Place, or Anthony Daniel?
No, ma'am.
What about when they would come back from visits with Peggy Banks?
No, ma'am.
And at this time, was Peggy Banks having visitations with both girls or still just Millie?
She would visit with both. It was still primarily just Millie, but sometimes it would be Millie and Layla.
And in regards to the Rosenbaums, did you ever receive any complaints from Miss Lambert about concerns or bruises or injuries that the girls would return with?
Yes, ma'am.
About how many times did you receive complaints from Miss Lambert about injuries to the girls when they would return from visitation with the Rosenbaums?
Something like one incident that comes to mind where she was really concerned.
And tell me about that incident.
They had came back from a visit. She had taken pictures and she had brought them up to the office because she was concerned about there was little marks on Millie's leg, I believe. I think it was Millie's.
And I'm showing you what's been already tipped into state's evidence, state's exhibit number 121, and it's behind you.
Oh.
120. And who's that a photograph of? If you know.
I want to say that's Millie.
Make sure you keep your voice up.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to look and talk at the same time. I want to say that that's Millie, I believe.
And state's exhibit number 119. Who's that?
That's Layla.
And was this one of the photographs that she brought to the office? Ms. Lambert?
I believe so.
Do you recall when that was that she brought those photographs to the office in regards to her concerns about injuries to the girls?
I'm not sure exactly what date it was.
And would looking at a document help to refresh your recollection as to that date?
Yes, ma'am.
You can look through that and see if that helps you refresh your recollection as to the date.
think that's the same one. I think it was July 9th.
After Ms. Lambert expressed her concerns, what did you do as the caseworker?
Well, once the pictures were given to me, I spoke with Ms. Brown about her concerns.
Ms. Brown or Ms.
I'm
Lambert?
sorry, Ms. Lambert.
And what did Ms. Lambert express to you in regards to her concerns?
And she felt like it was a matter of supervision.
Did you do anything else in regards to Ms. Lambert's concerns?
Honestly, just address the issue. Just spoke with both parties. I spoke with Ms. Lambert and got her concerns. Discussed it with my supervisor and had a conversation with Ms. Rosenbaum.
And what, if anything, did Ms. Rosenbaum say to you when you expressed your concerns?
She was receptive of it. I didn't receive any pushback.
Was there anything else that you did in regards to that issue?
No, ma'am.
At some point, were the girls placed with the Rosenbaums?
Yes, ma'am.
How long after the complaints by Ms. Lambert, how much time passed between the complaints of Ms. Lambert and the girls being placed with the Rosenbaums?
May have been a few weeks.
During the time that the girls were with Ms. Lambert, outside of the indication she's made about bruises that were coming back, the girls were coming back with after visits with the Rosenbaums, did you observe any other bruises or injuries to the children?
While with Ms. Lambert, no.
At some point in time, how do you know that the girls are now being placed with the Rosenbaums? Who made that decision? How did that decision happen?
We were actually instructed by our judge to move them.
Okay. And what judge is that? If you remember.
I'm not sure which one
Okay.
it was.
Was it, at that time, was the plan to place the girls with the Rosenbaums? Let me ask, after Ms. Lambert's complaint, what was the plan as far as visitation and placement with the Rosenbaums with defects?
We were going to continue the visitation just to give more time to, learn how to better manage the children in regards to supervision and making sure they're playing safe, I guess.
And were there any, resources or anything of that nature provided to the defendants as far as supervision and dealing with the kids after having the complaints by Ms. Lambert?
Nothing was put in place, but I do know Ms. Lambert offered her assistance to, she could call her whenever she needed help or advice about something.
And to your knowledge, did that ever occur?
Yes, they had open communication.
And you said at some point you got an order for the children to be placed.
Yes, ma'am.
And who removed the children from Ms. Lambert's home to take them to the Rosenbaum's home?
That would be me.
And did you observe the children on the day that you removed them from Ms. Lambert's home?
Oh, yes, I saw them.
Okay. And did you observe any marks, injuries, or bruises on them?
Not that I remember.
And during the time, do you recall what day it was that the girls were placed with the Rosenbaums?
I don't remember exactly what the exact day it was, no.
And I want to back up a bit. When they were with the Lamberts, you said they had overnight visits.
Yes, I am.
How long would those overnight visits last?
They would usually be on the weekends. It's like a Friday and a Saturday, and they would usually come back Sunday.
So what day would they pick up?
It would be Friday.
And what day would they drop off?
Sunday.
Would they go back to Miss Lambert's house in between that Friday and that Sunday?
No, they would usually have them for the overnight.
For the entire weekend?
Mm-hmm.
So once they get to the Rosenbaum's home, who's having visitations?
That would still be the biological parents and Miss Bank.
And how often are those visitations occurring?
The visits are supposed to be once a week. Honestly, as often as we could have them. It just depends on if the parents were available.
Okay. Now let me just ask you, when the Rosenbaums were having visits, when the girls were with the Lamberts, did you ever receive any complaints or concerns raised by either Jennifer Rosenbaum or Joseph Rosenbaum that when they would get the kids from either Miss Lambert or Miss Brown, that they would have injuries, bruisings, or anything of that nature?
Not that I remember.
And if there were complaints or concerns raised by the Rosenbaum, would you have noted it in the defects records?
I would think so, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And have you had an opportunity to go over the defects records during that course of time?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see any notation where the defendants were raising concerns about injuries when the girls are with the Browns or with the Lamberts?
No, ma'am.
Now, when with Millie was, and I'm sorry, I'm bouncing all this a
No, you're
lot.
fine.
When Millie was with the Lamberts, did Ms. Lambert ever raise any concerns about Millie lying?
Not that I remember. I'm not sure.
When the girls were with Ms. Lambert, did they continue with the therapy that they were having with Pathways?
I'm honestly not sure if it has stopped by then, because I know they had just started, but I know they didn't continue for long. So possibly.
To your knowledge, were they still having counseling on September the 24th of 2015?
I don't believe so.
And if there is a notation in the defects records concerning counseling on September the 24th of 2015, what would that be in regards to?
That could be just something that they have completed already, or that they have done and may not be doing it now. Maybe just like a summary.
A summary of, I guess, services they've received since coming into custody?
Yes, ma'am.
And is your supervisor, who was your supervisor at that time?
Miss Tamara Warner.
And does Miss Warner, does she have direct contact with the girls as your supervisor?
She can.
Okay. Did she have direct contact with the girls as your supervisor? Let me ask it a different way.
I'm not sure.
Was Ms. Warner responsible for making any scheduled appointments, counseling, doctor's appointments for the girls at all?
No, ma'am.
If she received any information about any therapy or any doctor's appointments, where would she get that information from?
It would come from me.
During the course of time when the girls were with Miss Lambert, did you have occasion to visit them in the Lambert's home?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did they appear?
They seem fine. Like normal.
Did you ever have any concerns about their safety during the time they were with Miss Lambert?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever observe any bruising or injury during the time when they were with Miss Lambert?
Just the ones that were pointed out, nothing other than the ones that we discussed.
And would you do any examination of the girls when they were with Miss Lambert?
Yes, ma'am.
And who would you examine and how would you do that examination?
Well, with Layla, I would undress her especially since she was nonverbal, so I would address her. Millie, I would examine her as well. Just looking her over, seeing if she had any marks or anything.
And did you ever, when you undressed the girl, did you ever find any injuries of any kind?
No, ma'am.
And I'm showing you State's Exhibit number 45. This mark right here on Layla's stomach, did you ever observe that during the time that she was with the Lamberts?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Once the girls were in the home with the Rosenbaums, how often would you see them or visit with them?
I would visit them once a month, but I would see them often.
During the times that you would see them or visit them, would Ms. Rosenbaum ever raise, or Mr. Rosenbaum ever raise any concerns that they might have?
As far as
The girls?
yeah, if they had any concerns, they were good about noting them or speaking to me about them.
Did they ever raise any concerns about Millie lying?
I honestly don't remember any huge issue about lying.
Did they ever raise any concerns about Layla having any rage issues or behavior issues?
Layla could get upset. That was a issue prior to them being placed.
Okay. And in regards to the Rosenbaums, did they ever raise that as a concern?
I don't remember having a conversation about it.
Do you recall the Rosenbaums ever raising a concern about Layla and her holding her breath or gasping for air?
No, ma'am.
Did you recall them ever raising any health issues or concerns they may have had for either one of the girls?
No, ma'am.
When the girls were with the Rosenbaums, how would you and the defendants communicate?
We communicated over the phone, through text message, in person.
Did you ever receive photographs of the girls from
Yes.
the Rosenbaums?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that unusual for a foster parent to send you pictures of the kids that were in their home?
No, ma'am. Some would, some wouldn't.
And what types of photographs would you get of the girls from, first of all, were they coming from Jennifer Rosenbaum or Joseph Rosenbaum?
Miss Rosenbaum.
Who would you say you had the most contact with out of the Rosenbaums?
Miss Rosenbaum.
Did you ever meet Mr. Rosenbaum?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And
Sorry.
about how many times did you meet him?
I'm not sure how many times I met him, but it'd been a few times.
And on what occasions and where would you have met him?
We've met at my office, and I've met him a couple of times. He would be at home sometimes when I come by.
And when you would visit in their homes or when you would receive pictures of the girls, how did they appear?
They looked to be happy.
During the time that the girls were in placement with the defendants, were they receiving any type of counseling?
I don't believe so.
And if they were receiving counseling, who would have set that up or scheduled those counseling appointments?
I would have been the one to arrange them.
Do you recall ever setting up or scheduling any counseling appointments?
Not that I remember. I think the counseling had ended by then.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Yeah, it's still too low. I'm sorry. Do I need to repeat it?
During the time that the girls were with the Rosenbaums, to your knowledge, did they ever go on any trips?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, where did they go on their trip to, or trips to?
I know one time they went out of town for a wedding. I believe it was Dakota. I think that was the only out of town visit.
And how did you know that the girls had gone on that trip?
Because you had to get approval to go out of state.
Outside of getting approval, did you get anything else to confirm that they had gone on that trip?
Not that I remember, just that they were going, the dates that they were going to be gone.
Did you ever see receive any photographs from that trip?
I don't remember if I received photos from that trip or not.
Did you ever talk to Millie about that trip?
I don't remember discussing the trip.
During the time, and if you need to look at the records, I can let you look at it. Do you recall having a visit with the Rosenbaums on August the 5th of 2015?
I'm not sure.
We do need to look at the records?
Yes, I'm not sure that's the exact date, but I'm sure I saw them in August. Oh, okay, like that's the 19th already. I was looking at the wrong date. Okay.
Do you recall that visit on August the 5th?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was that visit at?
This was done at the home. With the Rosenbaums, I'm sorry.
And at that time, did you visit with the children?
Yes, ma'am.
And tell me about what you did during that visit and what you observed.
Let's see, we discussed.
And if you could just look at it, and once you've refreshed your recollection, then look up, don't read from the document.
Okay.
Does that help you refresh your recollection as to that visit on the 5th?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what did you do and what did you observe?
My job would come in, greet everyone. I would usually speak with Ms. Rosenbaum first, and then I would speak with the girls separately. And during this time, we were discussing, schooling, getting the girls into daycare. So she was saying they were getting ready to enroll them at Ola Academy.
Okay. To your knowledge, had they been already enrolled?
I think she was in the process of getting them enrolled.
And that was on August the 5th?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you familiar with Ola Academy?
Wait, like that?
Had you ever heard of it? Did you know
yes,
anything about
ma'am.
it? And how were you familiar with Ola Academy?
Just heard about it. I didn't have a child there or anything.
after getting that information from Ms. Rosenbaum about enrolling in daycare, what else did you do during that visit?
Just spoke with my usual routine, spoke with the girls. After speaking with Ms. Rosenbaum, I'll speak with them privately. Speak with Millie. Layla would be there. I would undress and check Layla. I would always look over Millie and just talk with them and see how they're doing, how they're adjusting, how they're getting along with them.
And when you undressed Layla, did you find any injuries or bruises on her?
With Layla, no.
What about with Millie?
Millie had a small scratch that day.
When you saw that scratch, what did you do, if anything?
I asked about it, asked what had happened.
And what did she tell you?
That she had fell while they were playing around the pool, and she had fell and scraped her head.
And who's giving you this information? Is it Millie or the defendant, Jennifer Rosenbaum?
If I'm not mistaken, that one came from Ms. Rosenbaum.
And that injury that you saw, is it different from the injuries that were depicted in State's Exhibits 121 and 120? The injury that you saw on August the 5th, was it different from these injuries?
Yeah, it was on her. It was on her forehead.
Did you speak to Millie at all about the scratch on her forehead?
I believe so. I'm sure I did.
Would you have noted it in your records?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could look to see if you did.
Okay, I didn't.
And what did Millie tell you?
No, I was saying I didn't.
You
I
did
don't
not,
have
okay.
it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I just want to go back. You said on the August the 5th, there was a discussion about daycare.
Yes, ma'am.
According to your records, were they already enrolled or were they being enrolled? If you could.
According to records, they were being enrolled.
And I just want to.
Yeah, they've been enrolled.
So were they being enrolled or have they been enrolled?
Just has been enrolled.
So, and where did you get that information that they had been enrolled in Ola Academy?
Ms. Rosenbaum.
Do you recall during the month of August whether or not you were ever informed by Ms. Rosenbaum about having, first, let me start with this one, that Layla had fallen down the stairs and had hurt herself and had injuries?
I do remember, I'm not sure if it was in August, but I do remember her telling me that Layla had fell on the stairs.
Let me ask you, was this before Layla had a cast or after Layla had a cast that she talked to you about her falling down the stairs?
This is why she had a cast.
Okay. Do you recall when she got her cast?
In October, I believe.
So in August, were there any reports of Layla having fallen down the stairs made to you?
Not that I remember.
Do you recall in August, specifically on August the 12th, Ms. Rosenbaum reporting to you having to take Layla to the hospital to receive IV due to a stomach virus?
I don't remember having to get an IV. No, ma'am.
Are those types of things that should be reported to DFACS?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And to your knowledge and according to your records, were those things reported to you? And you can look through to see.
Okay. No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay. Let me ask you, as far as daycare is concerned, let me move forward. When do you recall your next visit being with the Rosenbaums?
It would have probably been in September
And where would that visit have occurred?
at the home.
And that's the Rosenbaum's home?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And tell me about that visit. And if you need, would you need to look at your records to help refresh your recollection as to what
I
occurred?
remember all of our visits. For September.
Let me just ask her, when will you be stopping?
It's going to be a while longer, judges, so if we want to end for the evening, we can, because I have quite a bit more to go over with Ms. White.
About 2 miles. All right. Why don't we just take our break then now, and we'll come back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you for your work today, and we'll see you at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Okay, we'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you, Judge.